Welcome to Radical World podcast, and I'm Jose Leal here with my partner Matt Perez, and today we're talking to Lizzie Benton.
Hi, thank you
Hi,
so much
Lizzie.
for having me. Hi.
Um, so I just want to. We're in our second episode this year of Radical World podcast. And want to sort of frame this conversation a little bit for our audience. Um, we've started this work as Radical World over the last few months, and the podcast's intention is to speak to radicals who may not know they're radicals, who don't have that language yet, who are doing pioneering work in changing our world, but don't have a framework by which to understand the work that they're doing. And so, in this process, we're really learning both how to speak to this work that folks are doing, but also how to integrate it into the framing of a fiat world with a fiat lens and the idea of radical lens in a radical world. And that work is it's our passion, it's the work we're doing, but it's really a gift that we're hoping to give to you and into future conversations, in order to help us be united in our work towards this radical world. So hopefully that makes some sense. But that said, what we want is a conversation, because we have as much to learn from you as we hope to impart to you, and maybe more, about both what you do and and how this fits into the work that we're doing. So, Lizzie, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being available for this conversation. And please tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to a point where you're a radical.
Yeah. Oh, I love that label. I'm a radical. Can I add that onto a CV or a LinkedIn profile? I'm officially a radical.
You are officially a radical.
So, how I got here, I suppose my pathway into the world of radical really began at many people's roots with Reinventing Organizations, reading that book by Frederick Leal. But really my shift into people work, I suppose, and the realm of this place came from a personal journey, if I'm honest. You know, I always labeled myself as a bit of a personal development junkie. And before I became a people manager or realized that this world existed, I was on a path of personal growth and personal development. And very much a lot of the things that I was learning on that personal journey really sort of led me into this realm of work, because at the time I started managing a team, and I was bringing so many of those skills and things that I was learning in my personal growth journey into my team, that I was like, surely this is a better way to kind of manage people than me telling them what to do. Like, shouldn't I just be helping them find their potential and be their best selves? And yeah, I read this book by Frederick Leal, Reinventing Organizations, and it felt like I'd found the language and understood that, oh gosh, yeah, this actually does exist. It's not just something in my own head. And so I've really dedicated my entire sort of professional career since then to learn more about, you know, these alternative ways of working, you know, self-management, and being able to be so much more whole and inclusive and participative within the workplace. So since then I founded my business Liberty Mind in 2018, so it'll be 6 years old in February.
Wow.
And ever since then, I've been sort of going into organizations and businesses to help them see things in a different light, and to be able to, what I call, unleash people's potential.
And have people have been responsive to that, or they've been like, you know,
Let's be honest, I live in the UK, so there is, of course, resistance because when we talk about being more inclusive or more democratic, that always leads to some slight resistance. So I'm not gonna lie, it has been a tough journey running a business and doing things this way for the 6 years that I've done it. But I think if I'm brutally honest, COVID helped us in some way. I really saw an uplift after COVID because all of a sudden, we were forced to think differently about how we work. And so
Right.
suddenly I had so much more interest in what I was talking about because people were thinking, oh gosh, yeah, Lizzie's kind of been talking about this for a while, but we just kind of sidelined her as a little bit crazy. Whereas now, people are actually talking about different ways of working because we were forced to.
By the
Yeah.
way, the label radical usually gets applied to someone who was formerly crazy. So that's good. You qualify. If you haven't been called crazy in the past, you definitely can't be a radical. So we talked about, you said lens there, right? And I'm wearing the little lenses here to make a point of being able to do the flip from seeing the world from this, command and control type of mindset lens, to flipping it to a radical understanding that there is humanity, there is nature behind this, and it's not just about systems. And that those systems, for the most part, haven't really served us very well as far as human beings. They've served the economy and society, but maybe not individuals in a very, very good way. So the work that you're doing, because you said lens as part of your conversation or your description of what you do, describe that a bit about what, you felt it, you knew there was something that needed to be changed. How did you see the thing that needed to be changed? What was your lens on that?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I always use the metaphor of it's as if I was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz and the veil had been lifted on how work was and how it could be. So for me, we are so, conditioned to our default way of working. And I have so many memories, even growing up, of just the expectation of what work should be, of what is expected of you in terms of work. From a very
Mhm.
young age, you're required to choose a career pathway, even though you have never experienced the world of work. You are asking a 16-year-old to choose a life-defining career that's going to set their path for the next 50 odd years or whatever they sort of tell you. And it's always, I think, the previous generation, it's still that job for life, and we're still kind of conditioned and manufactured in that way. And there were so many moments in my kind of younger life where I just thought, gosh, this isn't really anything to look forward to, is it? I'm going from the schooling system into the workplace. And I was always a very good little worker bee, I mean, I always showed up. I always gave 110% in my previous job roles, when I worked in a traditional organization. But I also started to notice that, actually that things like treating people differently depending on what their role or their position is within the hierarchy. I started to notice things and felt that inequality that was happening because of this very hierarchical structure and system that existed. So I feel like there was always a felt sense that something was wrong. But it wasn't until I had the language and I had the knowledge that I could, intellectually understand that to me it just felt wrong, before I had that. It's just a sense intuitively that is this all I have to look forward to when it comes to work and meaning and creating something in the world? I mean, I don't know, is that something similar that you guys have ever experienced? This kind of like disconnection that intuitively maybe you haven't had the language, but there's been a felt sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Matt shares this with me in our corporate careers. We, let me speak for me. I knew it was wrong. I knew it didn't feel right. And yet I was compelled to do it by the fact that, well, if I don't, this will happen. And if I don't, that will happen, and so much of what I had to recover from personally was the things I did wrong, knowing that I felt that they were wrong.
Mm.
And the layoffs and the business deals and the decisions and so forth that I made that were in I in my being, I knew they were wrong, and the struggle was the fact that I did them anyway because I was so consumed by the system and my role and my title and my bonus and my having a job and all of that stuff that caused me to do it. And so for me, what you've just described is it is the place at which we split away from that system and move towards being true to ourselves and true to our nature.
I'm a slow learner. I don't learn as fast as Jose. So for a long time, I thought I was the hero of my story, and I always saw myself as a protector. I'm protecting these little people, and it took me quite a while. I was 65 years old when the light came on, and I realized that they don't need protection. What the hell? They're grown people, and but it took a long time. You're really enamored into this thinking of, oh, you are the hero. You're setting an example for everybody else. Oh, you are is bullshit. And you mentioned reinventing organizations in the back room. I think it's a great book. It's a great book. But I get my inspiration from Maverick, written by Ricardo Semler, and I'm an older guy, and it was the thing that this could happen in Brazil in the 80s, in the early 80s, where things were intense back then, here and there, but it was more intense there, and that woke me up to the idea of self-management. This whole thing of people can manage themselves and all that. What we're pushing more these days, and what I think is going to be harder, and what I think is going to make a big difference, is co-ownership. So we call it co-management, co-ownership, because there's no self. There's no company that manages itself. That's silly. And co-ownership is a lot harder, but even co-management is still up to some benevolent dictator to say, yeah, I'll let him play at co-management for a while. And even in the stories that what's his name, Leal, read in his book, several of the companies have come back. Why? Because the benevolent management changed. And one of them, it was the son that pulled it all back and decided that no, that was a crazy idea. So we need ownership in the hands of more people, so they can say, no, we like it this way. We like it this way, and we're gonna continue going. And another thing you mentioned is it's good for our economy. That the system is good for our economy. I think it's limited. It's good in that it's given us 12,000 versions of chips. We got chips up the wazoo, if you go to Miami, which is mostly, it's got a big Cuban influence, you find 10,000 versions of banana chips, which I love. But do I need 10,000 versions? No, I need a few. So, anyways, that's what I wanted to say. What I wanted to ask you is, the UK and the US are a big part of that.
Yeah.
Not as people get in the back room and smoke and drink, and none of that. It's more of, hey, this is working. Let's make more of it. This is working. Make more of it. But you said you find that difficult, or the companies are not reacting to it. What does it look like
Yeah.
out there?
So here in the UK, I would say what that looks like is, what I've seen, what I've experienced a lot is that companies who are maybe more internationally focused or European tend to have I feel a higher tendency to adopt self-management in terms of principles and values and things like that. Here in the UK, we still, we can't deny that, unfortunately, we still have a very present class system. So when it comes to things like equality and social equity and things like that, they're even values that people may not even have personally, let alone when you're trying to then adapt them into a workplace. When we talk about democracy, I totally agree with you, Matt, about, Ricardo Semler and Maverick. And, being a Semco Style expert, one of the core values of Semco Style is democracy, is that it's actually, it's better for more people to be involved in making some of these decisions. It's important to have that inclusivity.
Yeah.
And that we really struggle with that here in the UK massively, and especially when we still have a very Victorian education system as well. So even at let's say a grassroots level, in order to change some of this workplace conditioning that we have going on that's so present, well, really, we need to kind of be changing that at an educational level, which is where Ricardo has been spending so much of his time with the Lumiere schools that he's been, spearheading, because the realization is there that we do need to change this from a grassroots level, from children, from an educational viewpoint.
Right.
Because, when we get into the workplace, we've already got so many layers of conditioning, not to mention the system itself is built and designed for a reason, for us to act and behave a certain way. But then when we add
it's to our solder. You can't flip it anymore.
You've just got to see it from a FIAT lens, Matt.
Yeah. Once you're stuck in that FIAT lens mode, right?
There.
You can't flip it. If you can't flip it, you can't make change.
Yeah.
Or any change you make is fragile, because you wake up in the morning and that old lens that you wake up with, because you haven't flipped it permanently, right? It's like you wake up in the morning, you wake up with this, and you have to make a little bit of effort to flip the lens the following, that morning, because yesterday's changes to us are, well, maybe we don't really need to do that, because after all, this is weird. Self-management, that's weird. Co-management or co-ownership, well, that's weird. New practices, that's weird, right? And that's weird when you look at it through this lens. But if you look at it through the radical lens, you're realizing that, holy cow, this isn't weird. This is the way it should be. Maybe we're not doing it right yet. Maybe we haven't done it as well as we can. But this is the progression where we need to move forward to. But so many of us included, I mean, this is not we're so much better than anybody else. All of us, we wake up in the morning and we're like,
yeah,
who can I control today? Who can I go tell what to do today, right? because that's, like Matt said, 50, 60, 70 years of conditioning, these lenses end up getting pretty much glued on, and flipping it is almost impossible. And speaking of which, I want to take you back to sort of the work that you're doing with organizations, and how now that we've introduced this idea of a fiat lens and a fiat world, which is how we describe the world that we're in today. What aspects of that fiat world and fiat lens do you sort of tackle in the pioneering work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So although I label myself a culture coach, I feel like the word culture is so ambiguous. But really, it is culture. It's how we're doing things in order to, a means to an end. How do we need to work together in order to achieve a goal? But that comes down to so much. When I talk about this type of work, I often use the metaphor of a high-performing athlete. A high-performing athlete that wants to win gold has habits, has behaviors, has a mindset that enables them to achieve that winning gold medal. And that's exactly the same as an organization, in a business. They have to have those habits, those behaviors, those mindsets in order to get to where they want to go. Now, obviously, what we could do is absolutely, we could default to the normal way of working that we're so used to, command and control, and, push the ship in that direction. But as we've seen, and as all of the data, we've got plenty of data to look on in terms of Gallup and Deloitte and all of those reports that tell us that people aren't engaged in work. So that kind of outdated way of working towards something isn't working anymore. So we need to these new mindsets, these new habits and these behaviors. So really, I work at all of that level. And so sometimes it always depends, I work in a very organic, holistic way with businesses. But for example, with one client that I'm working with at the moment, we're starting at the leadership level, changing their lens of what is it to be a leader in this new world? What does that look like when command and control isn't needed? It isn't necessary anymore. It isn't working. So very much looking at it from that holistic and much more organic point of view. I'm very grateful that I use lots of different tools within the self-management realm and my Semco Style toolkit. But really, it's very holistic and in what I try to do with organizations, because every team is different and every business has a different purpose that they're trying to achieve. So I think that's the really important part as well. It's really easy when we look at how to shift an organization. There's so many frameworks and things like that. And I think it can get very, blueprint again. It's like we're swapping blueprints around again.
Exactly. You mentioned the sports metaphor that you use. Are you familiar with Roger Bannister?
No, I'm not.
So Roger Bannister was the first man to run the 4-minute mile. Up till the moment he did, it was believed to be impossible for humans to do a 4-minute mile. Within 2 years of him having surpassed the 4-minute mile, crossed that barrier, more than a dozen men crossed that barrier. For centuries, no one had ever done that. And once he flipped the lens for everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. It just takes one pioneer. Yeah.
I love that story because it really speaks to this, what we can see, we can make possible. But when we are obscured, when it's, the world is only about command and control. That's all
we can imagine.
Yeah. But it's an imagination of seeing the possible, right?
Yeah.
I think, right? So I really love your idea of the holistic view, not just practices, because the holistic view is really about the lens. I mean, that's the language we use, but what you're describing is this understanding of who we are, understanding of what we need, in these contexts of work, in the context of collaboration and so forth. And that really speaks to what we call the radical lens, which is about being able to see that the systems we've created have been through this lens of force, this lens of constraint, command, control, put it in the box, right? Because if it's in the box, we can control it. If it's not in the box, we've got chaos. And then realizing that people aren't so flawed, so broken, so lazy, so, all of the attributes that we do in order to be able to instill control in our systems. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what's that transition from the fiat lens to the radical lens for you as you work in your work from that that whole, flipping from a broken, fragmented to a wholeness perspective?
Yeah, that's such a brilliant question. And I think there's no easy answer, because it's not like we'd love it to be a smooth transition, right? I mean, we can all hold our hands up, and even in this conversation, and admit that there's been some bumpy bits on the road to enlightenment.
Not for us. We knew exactly what we were doing all the time until we didn't, and then we didn't had no idea what it was, and then we did it again, and then we did it again. We keep doing this. We've got to reinvent every few months because we don't know. We're learning, and that's part of the beauty of it, right?
Exactly. And that's what I always reiterate to people. There's a reason it's called a practice. There's a reason it's called a meditation practice. There's a reason it's called a yoga practice, because we have to keep practicing and showing up, because it's not within our natural, habits or behaviors to maybe be this way. So it's that transition, it is a rough ride, but I think what's really important, and what, I take a lot of humility from, is that people continue to want to show up when they start to see these shifts. And that's what's really important. Even when we have those days where we think, gosh, but it would just be so much easier to tell everybody what to do. It's actually, we have a choice. We can choose. Yes, we can choose to go into that default mode of command and control and tell people what to do. But we also have a choice to be brave leaders and to actually step back, to allow people to step in. And I think that's where the difficulty is. And when people start to see that, it is a slow shift, but it's one that, people start to see each other beyond just their titles, just their role, just their position. They start to connect with each other on a much more human level. But yeah, like you said, Jose, it's keep showing up even when things get rough, because it's not an easy journey. And the real litmus test, is being able to stick with the journey even when it feels challenging. And there's parts of you that feel uncomfortable, is being in that discomfort.
This reminds me of a story which I haven't remembered in many years, so I don't know if to thank you or hate you for it. But anyway, I was working at a factory between high school and college, and I was part of the quality control group, 2 people, okay, and all the people on the line were Spanish women, and I happened to speak Spanish, so we had a great time. We got to know each other and stuff like that. I was very, when I found a problem, rather than yelling at them, I would say, "Oh, this is wrong. What did we do?" And she said, "Oh, my whatever." She had an explanation for it, and it won't happen again. I didn't ask her to say that. She said it. And one day I was frustrated or something. I don't know what it was. Okay, but the thing came through, and I picked it up and I said, "Who did this piece of shit?" in Spanish. It sounds stronger in Spanish. And the mood changed completely. The mood changed completely. It's like, who who's this guy? And because I didn't get a response, I got more
Agitated.
agitated. Yeah, that's a good word. And afterwards, I felt terrible. I didn't know why I felt terrible because I got my way, but I feel terrible. And that is, I think, very consequential to work in general. You yell at people, you get it. You may get what you want, exactly what you want, but you may not get what you need. What I needed at that point was, hey, Matt, shut up. And what is it you're trying to say? Well, this thing is wrong. Well, I did this. It would have fallen back into a conversation. And I didn't get that. I got this. They went back to their holes, and I went back to my hole, and we're throwing grenades back and forth. I didn't remember that story for a long time until now. So
And I think, I was just going to say, I think what you're describing, Matt, is, I mean, I think we all have that kind of story where we felt this sense of, well, screw it, I'm in charge, so
I'm in charge.
I need to be the one that needs to be, push the envelope here. And I think that's what the Fiat lens gives us, right? It's you have the role, you have the title, you have the responsibility, blah blah blah, and so it gives you the permission to push others, to be forceful upon others, right?
It pushes you to push others.
Yeah, but it opens the door and it's like, go in there, be that person. Yeah. And if you get caught yelling at them, it's good job. I liked what you did, right? Like, that was good. You're a strong leader. You're a strong QA person. You're a strong whatever it is, rather than
Lizzie was saying before, the point of practice is that's what you practice, yelling at people. And it's bullshit. And the point of practice is to keep the system in one place. So I don't know if you noticed, but we call it the present system, the fishbowl that we're all in, FIAT. And that's the water that we live in. I mean, dead crabs and stuff like that. And the other system, radical foundation based, because one is form. It's a fishbowl, and you swim in it, and like you said, you get kudos for being an asshole, really, and the other one is whatever we make of it. It's not a system per se. It's the root of a system. That's what the radical part, and that's what we have to get better at. And I agree with you that the UK is going to have a hard time with that. They invented enclosures. They invented a lot of things. The Industrial Revolution, which was good, and they're going to have to invent new ways of doing things. I really have hopes that once you guys get going, it's going to be a force, positive force in humanity, but it's going to take a while. And Brexit didn't work.
Yeah.
Didn't help.
So Lizzie, I wanted to ask you, going through that cycle of what you saw in this Fiat world that needed to change, what you sensed needed to change, that as you flipped your lens to this new way of seeing things and a new practices coming from that lens, what do you see as sort of emerging from this new lens that comes up with new practices, new ways of doing it? What does this radical world look like to you?
Yeah, that was such a strong question. And I suppose for me, I'm still an optimist. I'm forever an optimist with a with a tint of realism. I will be honest. There's always a little bit of realism in there for me, and I'm really hopeful. I wouldn't look at any. There's some amazing examples out there of organisations who are doing this phenomenally, but I think we've still got a long way to go. And at the moment, what I see emerging is a lot more consciousness of our humanity as individuals together. I think that's what I take a lot from, and being able to connect to each other on a human to human level. No longer, I always liked the way Frederick Laloux phrased it of, having to put a mask on when we come into work and we have to pretend to be somebody else. And throwing off that mask, I think, is the first thing that I'm seeing emerge. That actually, and I think again, it has been because of COVID. Because like we are now, we're all at home in our various home offices, and we can kind of get to know each other a bit better because we're not in an office where it's all very clinical and sanitary and devoid of any kind of creativity. We're all here as individuals and celebrating that. And I think that's the first layer that I'm seeing shed away, is this idea that we are all individuals and we do have life outside of work, and those two things tend to influence each other. So I'm hopeful that that's the first layer that we're kind of shedding in order for us to exist in this radical world. But I know that there is so much more that we can come to.
I couldn't agree more about being optimistic, because that's my nature and I can't help it. One of the things that I learned in my old career working in the automotive space, I was passionate about understanding the history of this and transitioning the media, the analog media to the digital media, and thinking about all of that work. What I realized was how quickly things change. Here in the United States, in 1905, there were 400 cars. 400 cars, that was it. In all of the United States, there were 400 cars in 1905. That meant there were no roads, there were no signs, there were no gas stations, there were no mechanics, right? None of that existed. You wouldn't have any of that.
Yeah.
By 1925, would you dare guess how many cars we had in the United States?
I could, maybe 1,000?
From 400 to 1,000 in 20 years.
Maybe 20,000.
How's about 18 million?
Wow.
When a paradigm changes, the speed of adoption is an amazing thing. We've been in the early stages, because to get to 400 cars, there were about 20 years of automotive development to get us to that point, to get to 400 cars being on the roads of the United States.
Yeah.
By the time we have 18 million vehicles on the roads of the United States, we have gas stations, we have real roads, we have signage, we have everything that made that possible. And all it did was the lens from all transportation is horse to transportation is a vehicle. And so I think we're really at that same stage. We're in 1905.
Yeah.
As far as radical companies, as far as this adoption of this radical lens. But I think the radical world in 20 years will be as different from what organizations are today as the world became from 1905 to 1925.
Well, it's got to be 10 years.
The sooner the better, but
It
as far as
it cannot be 20 years because that won't last that long. So, but no, I know what you're saying. It's a really good point that it takes a long while to go up the tip of the mountain, and not very long to go down and to in this case go down into money making. The thing that I wonder is, okay, so the attraction to making more cars and stuff like that. GM came up, and Chrysler came up, and Chevy came up, and they were all individual companies, okay? And and Mercedes-Benz came up, and what motivated that was the thing of, I make a car, I make money. I make 2 cars, I make more money. I make 3 cars, I make 300 cars, I make a lot of money. And then that getting into government and stuff like that. I don't know what the pool is for us yet. I mean, this idea that people will feel better and stuff like that is, I believe that it's very true, but I think we stand a higher mountain to climb, in that people are so used to and so trained from grade school to not trust themselves and to instead go into mental issues and all this stuff. But we'll see. I think you might be right that COVID had a lot to do with our moving forward, and I see other signs that make me hopeful, but I don't know if it's wishful thinking or not. So we'll see. 10, 20
I
years.
agree with you. I feel like the real question should be, when is purpose going to outdo profit in our agenda to create more meaningful organizations? So it's a big question.
Yeah. Or how do we define, maybe the question is, how do we redefine profit?
Yeah.
I don't know that is the question, but maybe that's the question, because we've looked at profit from this monetary perspective, and we've been making ourselves personally poorer, whether there's a bank account or not. We've personally become poorer about our lives, our health, our joy, our time with our families, our time with each other. All of those things have made us poorer. And yet we might have, the car in the garage and the dollar signs in the bank account. And I wonder if we need a different definition of what wealth is, right? Of what profit is, of what income is. Because if we have a different definition, maybe it's okay to be richer, right? Maybe it's okay to do things that will enrich in our lives and use that as a measurement. And look at me, how rich I am. Not because I work 80 hours a week, not because I'm a millionaire, not because of this, but because I'm rich because I have time with my family. I have time to spend with friends. I have time to talk to Lizzie Benton from around the world, rather than being, doing some work that supposedly is going to make me richer.
Yeah.
But I think this makes us richer.
Yeah.
This type of conversation makes us richer. And I think maybe that's the lens we need to flip as well, is to understand that this number that we've applied to our wallets, to our bank accounts, is a fallacy. And that the true wealth has nothing to do with that number.
Well, let me say it the negative way. Maybe it'll come out the right way. There's a conversation, right?
Yeah, this is a conversation, so we're just yapping away.
What you're talking about is well-being. It's wealth, but for the being, not the bank account kind of thing. And the problem is we're competing with a system that's been made up, thousands of years. Women used to be chattel, and kids were chattel, everything but the man of the house. He was the king of the castle. And everything was, just by the way. It's still that way, it's still that way in most of the world, by the way. Unfortunately, so that women and kids are
property in essence.
Property, yeah, that's a nice way to say it. But anyways, and just saying, oh, you can have less wealth, and I like wealth. No question that I like money, but less wealth and more well-being. You know, that's a tough one. So, okay, nothing came up to me. I don't know if you're lazy would have more, but that's what we have to find. And the closest thing I said is, well, businesses today are dictatorships, right? They're ruled by one person or a few people. There's this Politburo called a board, but it's a dictatorship, and it gets in its own way of making money. So until we can demonstrate, I don't know how we're going to illustrate that you can make more wealth for everybody. You have to. Everybody's an owner, right, in the radical space, and you have to make a lot more money, but for everybody. In other words, you cannot be a billionaire, but you can be a millionaire. That's all I have. so something along those lines. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of the fact that Matt and I have engaged in a conversation here, and we've sort of kept you out of it for a little bit. And so I
was hoping to have her be part of it.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting because I was just thinking it's funny how we were talking, Matt was saying about that dictatorship of, organizations are technically the last dictatorship to exist. Yeah. But I think what the difference is here is that there's no accountability, right, for these organizations to act in many of these ways. There's very little limitations and, consequences for these organizations to act in the way that they do, whether it's unethically or against the environment, the things that they do, there's no accountability. So until there's some kind of systemic accountability that, actually enforces something on some of these organizations to be more ethical or to be more environmentally friendly or whatever it is that we need, they're still going to operate the way that they do. Like even in the UK, we've had a huge thing in the media with the post office recently. I'm not sure whether that news has made it across to the US, but it's, one of the biggest injustices for 20 odd years in the UK, the way, people have been imprisoned falsely by their employer because of a system that they had in place. And it's absolutely disgraceful. But the consequences of that is it's taken a UK TV show to bring that to the spotlight because it was taking so long to go through the legal system. So it's dreadful that there's no accountability for us to change it as well. So it's almost like we definitely need to change it from an organizational perspective. We need more ethical leaders, but we also need more accountability as well.
And I think the way that from the FIAT perspective, right, the way we think of it is, well, we need more control of the company. And that, of course, has to be an external thing, right? We're trying to fix bad system by using another bad system to apply more force to the first bad system.
Yeah.
Right? And in reality, and this is what we advocate here with the idea of a radical lens and a radical world, it has to come from us as individuals.
Yes.
Because we sense when we know we're doing wrong. We know it.
Yeah.
The government systems do not know when they're doing wrong. They too are susceptible to the same problems as these companies, right? These organizations.
We're the biggest the biggest businesses in the world are nations.
Exactly. The biggest corporations are nations. Exactly.
Mm.
And so for me, the idea of what you've just pointed out very, very correctly, Lizzie, is if we're seeing these deficiencies, and with our fiat lens, we're imposing more rules, more controls, more of this, what we're actually doing is creating more dysfunction. Because when you're building more of the same kind of thing, you're only going to get more of the same kind of results.
Yeah.
Same dysfunction. And the work you're doing is really bringing in that natural human, evolutionary, whatever you want to call it, system of keeping each other in check. If you're not my boss and you do something wrong, then I can say, well, I don't think that's right. You want to introduce a chemical into our food? You want to throw somebody in jail just because some computer system says that you're guilty? What the heck's going on here, right? But we, as people in organizations today, we feel that like that's not fair, that's not right, this is a bad system, this is a wrong thing. And what power do we have? Zilch. In a fiat organization, we have zero power. And the idea isn't to say, well, let's go and fight this organization, because when we do, we're back at the same problem. How do we create a new kind of organization? And I think that's the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Is doing the work of creating a system that recognizes that people have the power.
Yes.
Not to empower them, but to recognize they have the power.
Yeah.
That fair?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it is. And it's making them realize they have that power, I think, is so important. Yeah, absolutely. It's unleashing that, because the word empowerment is such a false word, really.
Yes,
they already
give someone else power, right?
Yeah, they already have the power, but it's making them aware of that consciousness, shifting that dynamic. Yeah.
So we're coming to 12 o'clock, which that time has gone very quick. So why don't you summarize some of your work and it applies and what you learned about in this conversation, if anything?
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I've absolutely loved this conversation, and I could sit here talking to you guys and philosophizing so much about these conversations. I think it's going back to that, the personal practice of showing up. It's really reiterated that for me, that actually, we have to also choose as an individual how we decide to show up in our existing, if we have that lens taken off, but we exist in that fiat world, like how can we choose differently as an individual to be and exist and work together? So I really feel that's reiterated it for me even more so during this conversation, and it's really given me a lot of food for thought around what does that future look like? How do we continue to navigate towards a radical world?
Good. So I'm going to announce.
I was going to say, before you do that, Matt, what did you learn, if anything?
Lizzie.
No, I'm asking you, Matt.
Oh, what did I learn? Reminding me of the story was significant. It resonated with me, and the whole thing of well-being versus wealth. But I knew it was going to be very difficult. I know I'm not going to be able to see it, the full thing functional, but I may be able to imagine that it's got going. The other thing, that's what I learned.
Yeah. And for me, Lizzie, the way you described the the fact that it's about seeing empowerment,
Mm.
I think that's a huge part of what we call the radical lens. And I hadn't seen it before,
Mm.
because the radical lens is in part unshackling myself from this belief that I don't have the power, because I'm just an employee. I'm just a this, I'm just a that, I'm just a the other. And it's really sort of removing those constraints, because what we do is we take kids to school and we say, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do that and you can't do that, and you go to work and you can't do that, right? And so I think your words there, that I learned something there, so I appreciate that, because I think that really opens up a different understanding for me of what that radical lens is. It's not just who we are, which is
Mm.
partly how I describe it, recognition of who we are, but the recognition of the power we have, and that I think is that's beautiful. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
So next week we're gonna have Luis Salas. It's the way it's pronounced. It looks like sales, but and I met him once upon a long time ago. He's a nice guy, founder of Polymath and a professor at one of the big universities in Mexico. And he's been true to the self-management force, or whatever you call it. That. So we'll have a conversation with him and learn something from him, I hope. And that's what he's got a tagline, in case you wish to mention, co-creating ambidextrous organization. I don't know what that means, but we're gonna find out.
We'll learn something, at least what ambidextrous means.
Well, I know what ambidextrous means. I just know what ambidextrous organizations, which are made up people. Everybody's right-handed or everybody's left-handed. Or, anyways,
Lizzie, this has been a beautiful conversation.
yeah, it's been very nice.
Very much.
And I think we're starting to hit our stride about what we want this to be as far as a conversation. So I really appreciate you asking questions, and I wish we had given you more room to ask more questions, but that was okay. I think this was it's getting closer to what I personally was hoping we would do with our Radical World podcast. And thank you for helping to teach us how to do this right, at least righter than it has been. And it's been a beautiful conversation. So I just thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me, both of you. You've also enlightened my thinking tonight. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, and I should say there are two books that we have now. One's called Radical Companies Without Without Bosses and Employees, and the other one is called Radical in Details, which are born out of the questions that people ask about radical and stuff like that. So they're on Amazon, I think, and you can get them there or not get them, or I'll send you a PDF. It doesn't matter. So, and I echo everything that Jose said.
Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Till next time.